Well, it looks like ESPN's Joey Galloway is probably starting to wake up and watch some film. He had a very good take over the weekend, which was that the Georgia Bulldogs are where good stories go to die. And it made me think, hey, let's take a look back at some of these games. Obviously, you know it at the time, but I did want to review how many teams Georgia has given their first loss of the season to. So you open up with Clemson. Obviously, someone's going to lose, and that was Clemson's first game and first loss. A 10-3 slugfest where JT Daniels had 135 yards. We first found out about his lingering injuries, and Zamir White ran for 74, and Georgia put Clemson away sort of quietly at the end, 10-3 with a Chris Smith touchdown at the end. The next week, UAB and Georgia gives the Blazers their first loss of the season, a 56-7 blowout. Stetson Bennett with 288 yards. Zamir only had 34 that day. That's when Brock Bowers really showed up, 107 yards for Brock Bowers that day. Third week of the season, South Carolina comes in undefeated, gets blown away, 40-13. That game, JT Daniels, 303 yards. Kendall Milton, 66. A.D. Mitchell with 77. The first game of the season where Georgia did not play an undefeated team was the Vanderbilt game. They won 62-0. Stetson was actually the leading thrower in that game, 151 yards, and then Zamir with 48. Brock Bowers with 69 receiving yards. A week later in Athens, number 8 Arkansas comes to town, undefeated, gets beat 37-0. That game, Stetson, who was making another start, 72 yards was all he was asked to throw. James Cook, 87 yards. Rushing, Kenny McIntosh with 27 yards receiving was the high that day. Play Auburn. Only the second team of 7 that Georgia's played this season so far that has already had a loss coming into the game. They go on the road to Auburn, a 34-10 win, a 24-point win. Stetson with a start in that game, 231 throwing it. Zamir, 79 yards. Lab McConkey, 135 yards. 2 deep balls to Lab McConkey from Stetson Bennett for the sizable lopsided win over the Tigers in the Deep South's oldest rivalry. And then this past weekend, an undefeated Kentucky comes to Athens, plays pretty well. I would say plays Georgia about as well as anybody has, maybe with the exception of Auburn. And Clemson did too, but Clemson couldn't score at all. A 30-13 win for the Dogs. Stetson with another start, 250 yards. Zamir, 51 yards and a touchdown, or did he have 2? Brock Bowers with 101 yards. Brock Bowers has led Georgia in receiving 4 out of 7 games. So that's pretty interesting there. But, when you go through seasons and you start getting a chance to start looking back at things, UAB is 5-2 right now. That was a team that a lot of us thought was going to be pretty good, and it turns out they were still pretty good. Kentucky has 1 loss. Auburn has 2. Arkansas now has 3 losses. Clemson has way more losses than they would prefer, but they're still holding on there in the ACC 4-2. Dabo's not going to LSU. Of course, he didn't say that, but that guy. Anyway, so I think that this is not a new thing that Georgia's been a solid team for a long time. I mean, when you look back at these of the 21, the 20, and the 19 season, that I don't know how many games that is, but there's been 4 total losses in that entire time, and 2 of those were to the team that went on to win the national championship. If you go back and look a season ago, Georgia they've already got 4 wins over ranked teams. Last season they had 4, so a couple top 10 wins in 2020, and then 4 total over ranked teams. And you look back at 19. Not as many big games, so to speak, but they won a lot of them. The big games, they won all of them except one, which was the LSU game. They beat Notre Dame, a top 10 team coming into Athens. They beat number 6 Florida. They win at number 12 Auburn. They lose to LSU, lopsided affair, 27-point loss, and then they beat number 7 Baylor. I mean, a little bit. This is what Georgia's done for a while. 2018, they beat ranked South Carolina on the road. They lose to LSU in Baton Rouge. They beat top 10 Gators, top 10 Kentucky. Then they beat ranked Auburn. They lose to Alabama, lose to Texas. That was the one season that was really probably their least productive in big games. And you go back to the 17 season where, they handled Notre Dame, ranked, Mississippi State, ranked. Auburn on the road, lose that game. And they beat Auburn, number 2 in the country, 28-7. Not a blowout, but certainly a lopsided game. Then they beat number 2 Oklahoma in overtime before losing number 4 Alabama. Georgia's been winning big games for a long time. What Joey's trying to say was that there's been a lot of good feel-good stories this season. Here comes Arkansas, unexpectedly being undefeated, come into Athens and they get their face rubbed into the dirt. Here come the Cats, a physical team that has already beaten LSU, already beaten the Gators. I mean, this is a Kentucky team that has been good for a while, has been solid for a while. It's going to be one of their best teams in school history. But they have been in tight games and have won them. A 7-point win over Mizzou, a 5-point win over UTC, a 6-point win over Carolina on the road, 7-point win over the Gators, and the blowout over LSU, and then a blowout loss to Georgia. It was a blowout to Georgia, but it's kind of just sort of a convincing win. 17-point, could have been 24, But I think that when you see this, there's always going to be good teams that you play in this league. And a season ago, I remember there was discussion of, nobody wants to play Missouri now. And Georgia beat them by 100 or whatever it was. So the same thing repeats itself. It's not abnormal for these things to occur. But it has been interesting to see, an undefeated stretch of the year where 5 of the teams that you play are undefeated before you come in. A season ago, Cincinnati was undefeated before Georgia beat them. So they're not going to keep playing undefeated teams. Missouri, Florida, Tennessee, Charleston Southern, these are all teams, Georgia Tech, obviously. These are all teams with losses. And, they're not going to play an undefeated team in the SEC championship game. It remains to be seen if Georgia will play an undefeated team in the playoff. It remains to be seen if Georgia will be undefeated when they get to the playoff, assuming that they do. So it is what's been happening lately. This is one of the best programs in the country, probably top 2, 3, or 4. And that they're beating people's brains in, it can't be surprising. That they're killing hopes and dreams. I mean, for the most part, that's what Kentucky basketball does. That's what Carolina basketball does. That's what Duke does. It's really neat when Florida State comes in and gets a win at Cameron Indoor every now and then, but it's not common. And, the last team to beat Georgia in Sanford Stadium was South Carolina. And that was just one of those things that happens. You can't guarantee everything in life. You certainly can't in sports. When you turn it over 4 times like that, you're going to lose. But it was curious to see Joey Galloway talk about that and him use the word physicality as often as he does. It's like it's one of the few terms that he knows, it seems. But I am glad to see that he's watching these games a little bit closer because Georgia's been this way for a while. Glad you noticed. We'll see you over on the website.